are we as society that far radicalized, let's say, or subverted, as we're talking about subversion? Does it overwhelm what we, class as common sense, like human instinctive common sense? I saw a quote today from somebody, and they said, the media is the real virus, people's behaviours is the real pandemic, the cure is common sense. Holocene podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Alchemist Vision, delivering a new line of clothing, helping protect against the negative effects of EMFs. Check them out on Instagram at Alchemist Vision. For a 10% discount on your first order, at the checkout use promo code Holocene10 for a discount. Check them out online at www.alchemistvision.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Holocene podcast. In this episode, Jay and I are joined by a guest from over the pond in Ireland. Fellow researcher and friend Tom Critical Think joins us in discussion as we take a look back at 2020 so far and share some ideas and some of our own perspectives on the events that have gone before us and currently dominate public opinion.
Right, welcome to another episode of the Holocene podcast with Jay and Ben. Today we wanted to get on one of our very good friends. His name's Tom and he goes under Critical Think on Twitter. Been speaking with Tom for probably about a year and a half now, and I actually introduced him to Ben quite a long time ago, where we have a separate Telegram group. We're always up to date, always sharing really good information. He has some amazing and incredible insights that we wanted to kind of probe him on and to talk about what's going on in the world right now and trying to make sense of a messy 2020. So welcome on, Tom. How are you doing?
Thank you very much. It's great to be on here. Thanks for having us on, Ben and Jay. That was a great intro. I think you covered everything. Yeah, guys, it's been a pretty crazy year so far. Well, I think we started off the year with threats of an escalating conflict between America and Iran, and then we graduated to bushfires. What else was there? Earthquakes and volcanoes, and then we got hit by COVID, and now we have these racial protests. So yeah, it's been a pretty crazy one so far. And I remember last year, just in the chat leading up to all of this, we were kind of talking about the financial situation, like for the last couple of months of 2019, globally central banks' balance sheets were exploding, and we were thinking it's going to get to a point where we're going to have a huge financial crash. But all of that seems to have been co-opted now by a kind of flurry of different events which have driven the economy to a standstill. So I'm kind of wondering, is all this to do with the fact that we were coming to a major financial crash? But beyond that, the riots in the past couple of weeks, I was kind of thinking to myself, we're at this juncture where what we need is for people to come together and kind of question government policy and question the fact that our society has been locked down by such a small percentage of the population, especially in light of the debt rate being revised down to, I think, 0.26%. So at just the time when people needed to come together, this George Floyd incident occurs, and now we're all fighting against one another. It makes you question the motive of things and what's going on.
Yeah, I love the way that you said graduated into, and then we went and obviously moved on. But it feels like there's been about 3 or 4 events that almost signalling the end of the world, and it's crazy that it's all happening. We're not even at the summer solstice yet. We're not even halfway through the year. or the peak of summer, and we've already had a global pandemic, a race war. London
What's
last
next?
weekend was embarrassing, absolutely embarrassing what's going on there. And you're right, this is the time where we need to, as a community, we need to be sticking together. And it almost feels, and I think that this whole thing, and we can get into this later down the line, but I think that there's bigger agendas at play. Like, we'll touch on that. But it feels like people were starting to ask difficult questions around COVID, and all of a sudden there's a new toy to play with, and we're all bloody trying to kill each other over something else now. And I was actually, before we started talking, I was looking on Twitter, and I could see that World War III was trending again. I remember that trending at the beginning of the year. Now, apparently something's happened between India and China. There's been a conflict where I think a few people have been killed, military people. So it's just like, what next? Where do we go from here?
There's apparently an outbreak in Beijing as well, and I'm reading some reports, and they're saying that it's a very serious situation. So I think an awful thing to consider now is that just as we're coming out of lockdown, that we go straight back into one. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But that's the first thing I kind of thought when I read that, and then what sprung to mind immediately after that was that they will probably then use these riots as a reason. Oh, look, like, we told you this virus was bad. Now you all have to go back into lockdown. So you can kind of see it coming in advance. Hopefully we're wrong about this, but other people are kind of being strung along by the narrative of the mainstream media. But I know the three of us do kind of look past that, and we do know there is always something else at play.
Well, we have flip-flopped a bit, I think it's fair to say. We've had our moments in the group. We've had moments where, probably before most people were talking about COVID, we were concerned, and we were looking at the severity, and we're frantically digging on it, trying to figure out what's going on.
I bought respirator masks for my whole family, and now I feel so dumb looking at them. They're like, even if I put them on, I look like a big bumblebee. It's like, why did I buy this? Like, this is. But then also, I was there. We were all there, sure, and it looked at the start, it did look very serious. But now that we're further down the game, we're kind of thinking more along the lines of, okay, is there a Hegelian dialectic kind of problem reaction solution going on here? And I think for anyone who's kind of thinking in general, or thinking full stop, I think it's very easy to see that even if the virus is legit and it came up spontaneously, even if all that is true, that they are using this situation to lock down society, bring in things like contact tracing, limit travel, and actually get people afraid so that we swap our freedom for security. So that's pretty obvious, I think, to most people what's going down currently.
Yeah. Ben, did you? Yeah, I completely agree with you. And that's even just looking at it from a basic level. I think even the most, I don't know, conservative of people would probably maybe agree with that, or they at least wouldn't see that as being far out, But Ben, did you buy a mask in the end? I don't think we spoke about this. I know I did.
I was just trying to get in on the conversation there when Tim said that he'd actually gone out and bought a mask, and I know you did. I remember the pictures going up on social media. I mean, if there was an award for best mask, Jay, I think you would have won it hands down. But
we've got two of those bad boys. I
I
might flip one on eBay now while all the normies are panicking still. I might be able to get a bit of profit on that. I'd rather over-egg it from the beginning though than over-egg it now, which most people are. People are wearing masks now, and I'm just cruising. I say this joke quite a lot. I went into lockdown first, and I came out first. And I think all three of us have probably done the same.
Yeah. There's some great memes on social media regarding mask wearing. I have shared a few over the last few weeks. Um, I've got one here. It says Confucius says, "He who wear mask alone in car also wear condom alone in bed."
I think you posted one into our chat a few days ago, Ben. It was like an image of a group, a bunch of cartoon figures wearing masks, and like on them was all these like programmed newspeak terms that we're seeing, like social distancing and whatnot, and it was just all under kind of masks, and it's like yeah, people who are going out wearing masks, they're the ones who are more buying into the fear, and once you start using their terms to create this new normal, then you're kind of caught in the narrative that they want you to believe, I think.
Yeah. I at the very, very beginning of the lockdown period, I think, if I remember rightly, the article was written on the 27th of March, and I think lockdown had only got activated on, was it the 23rd? And there was an independent journalist that I'd come across on his Twitter profile, and I followed to where he writes his pieces. Granted, it's an opinion piece, but there was a lot of fact and a lot of thought-provoking narrative to his piece that he wrote. But he wrote even back then about what was going on, the fact that the government had just initiated the coronavirus bill, and that was the first time I really understood a lot of the ins and outs, like the change of death registration, the Mental Health Act changes, the stop and detain, the cancelling of local elections, I believe, is it the police or the crime commissioner re-elections, all these different things under the name of the corona bill, and half of them, it's like, well, what does that do to solve a supposed pandemic virus? Like, do you know what I mean? All these questions were in this article, and I remember reading it thinking, this is insane. Like, what on earth is going on? And then the article went on to write towards the end at how the Guardian newspaper, for example, had already written 3 pieces under the premise of the term the new normal. And that was before anything really sort of captured the nation's attention. And I was saying these things to people on the telephone, on the internet, on social media, and some people were just like, they were literally laughing at me. And I remember feeling the frustration and thinking, don't you get it? Don't you get it? Like, I couldn't prove that the virus was, potentially a hoax or being used to manufacture a hidden agenda. But like, and then the numbers things started coming out, and it was just like, and even now, it's insane how quickly, as you mentioned at the top, Tom, how quickly we moved from all these things that have gone on so far, and COVID being the sort of what you would imagine would be the year defining thing, and then we've switched into
deleting our own history.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we've gone from going to war with Iran to bushfire in Australia, where we're all donated and all the celebrities are all over that one. Climate change being the world's going to end in 5 seconds, to changing laws and now deleting our history in 6 months.
Well, I was going to add to that as well. Like that's pretty much a almost predominantly a Western world perspective, but there's many things going on in other countries. You've got all the unrest in Hong Kong. You have the swarm of locusts. Ebola is now being rolled out again in Africa. Swarm of
locusts is one I forgot about. Yeah, that's just kind of dropped.
We've had earthquakes. We had floods in Jakarta. We've, like you said as well, Jay, like mentioning the tension between India and China right now. It's kicking off everywhere, and I think we're guilty living in the Western world sometimes because of that mainstream media narrative and the social media platforms, which are obviously part of the problem too. We see a certain snapshot of what's going on. But when you look broader and you look around world news, because that's one of the advantages of being in such a connected society nowadays. Everything's global instantly. The content is there. You just got to know where to look, and that's another part of the control I think that we're under, especially here in the UK. People only see what's been blasted into their faces, and they're not even having the second thought to have a look around.
Well, the problem is there's so much information, whereas before there wasn't enough access to information. Now with the internet, and some people would say they've done themselves an injustice because there's access to everything, but it's so messy and there's so much. And I think, and I was saying this to Tom just before we started recording, I think we're under some type of trauma-based mind control. I really do. It's so easy at the moment to convince yourself that the world's falling apart and it's a horrible place. And I was saying this to you, Ben, the other day. I went out with one of my friends on a bike ride the other day. He's a black guy. We spoke about this stuff. We had a mature adult conversation. We laughed at a few parts of it, you know, how hysterical white people are at the moment. And it was brilliant. We was out in nature. We went to the woods. It was awesome, you know. And on the way back, I said to him, I was like, this is life, you know, and how long before people come out and experience life again before they realize that it ain't that bad. You know, it's easy to be mind controlled and think that all black and white people hate each other and everyone's racist, and, you know, not saying that that doesn't happen, because it clearly does. We know it does. But most people are just normal people. And, you know, we said our goodbyes and it was a bloody nice ride. And that was the end of that one. So it's so easy to forget when you're on lockdown and tensions are rising and the news is, you know, it's brainwashing us. It's so easy to convince us of all of these things, you know.
I think a big component of this, though, is group psychology. Like there was this experiment done called the Ash experiment. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And it basically showed that against someone's better reason, if other people choose an answer that they know is wrong, they will conform. So and there's actually a part of your brain that lights up. So like I think this goes back into like antiquity, you know, like we always had to be part of a group, and if we were ostracized from the group, we could die. So like deep in our subconscious, unconscious minds, there is this this need to kind of fit in with the group. So that's the kind of downfall with the internet, is it is one big hive mind, and if the consensus is leaning in one direction, a person is going to go along with it. In this experiment, basically how it worked was, so if few people who were part of the experiment, they were asked to pick first. So basically on the screen, 3 or 4 lines were drawn, and the people were asked each time which was the longest line, which was the shortest line, and such. And I think there was 5 or 6 who had to answer, and the first 3 were always part of the experiment. And sometimes they would all answer incorrectly on purpose, just to see what the last 2 people who weren't part of the experiment, how they would answer. And they found that I think it was 32% of the time, the people who weren't involved in the experiments would go along with the answer that was given, even when they knew it was wrong. And they found that in total, I think it was 75% of people would over many iterations of the test would eventually conform to the incorrect answer. So it shows that in people's minds that there is this really strong sense of conforming, and it's actually a very scary experiment, you know, because if we're all led along like this, you know, what happens when something huge like this happens? And bigger the lie told to us, the more likely we are to believe it, because in the face of someone questioning the whole COVID-19 situation, you know, it's just flabbergasting how anyone could even contemplate that there's something off here. It's just too big a lie to tell, you know.
Yeah, that's why I keep thinking that they're going to come out and say it was made in the lab and it was an accident. Because I think that almost scratches the itch of uncertainty that people have about the main narrative. You know, I think a lot of people would go, yes, I knew there was something off. That's what it is. But they won't think deeper. They'll probably just accept that. That hasn't fully been, it's not a consensus yet, but you're hearing noises, and I feel like it's kind of in the background. It's almost some type of subconscious programming. So I wouldn't be surprised if that is the conclusion that we all come to in the end. But saying what you've just said in that study, over the years, I've been practicing this continuously. I now do the opposite. Probably not in a test setting. I'll probably fall into that category. You know, I'm just being honest. But in terms of like when I hear the consensus of anything, I automatically think the opposite. Because I just don't. Whatever everyone else says is always wrong. It always is. And I'm not saying the opposite is always right. I'm just saying the main conclusion is always wrong. And there's it's normally the truth is in the shades of grey. But I reflex action reject what the consensus is every time.
So like that 25% who never conforms. That's good.
Yeah, like with when they were saying COVID, there's nothing to worry about. It's all good. It won't come over here. It won't happen to us. We were like, bullshit. It's coming. Because as soon as they said that, I just knew that wasn't true. The only thing is now they're saying it's the real deal. Now I'm doing the complete opposite again. So a bit of a yo-yo, but
kind of switch you went through. I remember at the start, you were saying that no one else around you was worrying at all, and you were trying to get people to think about it, start stocking up food, keeping up with what's going on. And then the second it got to the UK, you kind of flipped and everyone else was panicking, but you weren't.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I come out earlier. Ironically, one of the reasons why I've been quite up to date with the way things are going is my dad. He delivers like high quality drugs to hospitals, and he was going to the Nightingale in Birmingham. So every day he was giving me like a running commentary of what's happening, how many people are in, how many people are out. The fact that they were building a Tesco next to the hospital when they were built. So they started putting people in the hospital and they were building a Tesco next door. And my dad was like, why? And the lady said, well, people need to eat. And my dad was like, this is bullshit. And I remember laughing with him at the time. And we discussed it every day, numbers going in. And it wasn't long before it started drying out. And then obviously they closed it and all of these things. And he was going to hospitals and he was like, Jay, they're dead. They're all dead. There's no one there. So that when I started hearing that, and my dad, he's quite clever, he's quite switched on, but generally his first response is to follow the kind of the mainstream. And when he started going against it, I was like, I have to believe that, because he's not the type. He wouldn't make things up. He's very careful with what he says. So the fact that there's no one in hospital, I mean, what the bloody hell's going on?
Well, as you mentioned that, Jay, I've actually seen this evening some breaking news that's appearing on Twitter now, that in Brazil, I think I've got this pronunciation right, Bolsonaro, who's the Brazilian president. I don't know if you've followed anything of Brazil. He's been not having a bar of the official World Health Organization and COVID narrative. He's been going out on TV, meeting people. Like, he's been like, bullshit. This is all bullshit, and this is the president. Well, it just broke this evening that 5 members of Parliament. No. 5 members of Parliament from Brazil, sent by Bolsonaro, have broken into a hospital that claims
I retweeted this.
5,000 infected and 200 deaths from COVID-19, and they've filmed it and put it out online. These politicians. That they've caught them red-handed, and the hospital was never even finished. And they go in and they're showing the footage of around they're being confronted by people from inside. Obviously, it's all I believe in Portuguese, but there's the internet has this wonderful thing of letting everybody know what's going on, and it's been translated. And Yeah, it's turned out it's like a fake, privately funded hospital. There would be state payments for the treatment, and there was nothing going on there, apparently.
That's obviously over the president's head. So it just shows you who's pulling the strings here. Well, it doesn't show you who, but it shows you that he isn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
For him to be calling that out, it's like, well, who's doing this?
It's also it's also extra interesting because apparently Brazil is the worst hit country. So if the president of the apparently worst hit country is questioning it, well then maybe there is something going on.
Does make you wonder, doesn't it?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. You know, we had all these protests in London last weekend and the weekend before. So that was, what, a week and a half ago was the first mass protesting. Pretty much nobody wearing masks. I mean, there was a few. I'd be interested to see if numbers spike from there. I mean, if they don't, surely that is enough for most normal, you know, half-brained people to look at it and think, that doesn't add up. What's going on here then, you know?
I think because they kind of need to keep the COVID narrative alive, that I think we'll inevitably see spikes come out of this, and that's perhaps why we've seen it take off again in Beijing. So perhaps they're related, because if it doesn't spike off from here, like I think most people are going to start asking serious questions about what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we have had a few conversations. Well, I say a few. We speak pretty much every day about what's going on, and we're frantically working together all the time trying to make sense of the mess that's going on right now. Of course, we were talking about the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and didn't want to get too involved in kind of on the surface stuff, because I think it's a huge trigger at the moment, and what I wouldn't want to do is try and, you know, start kind of offending people and causing further conflict, because we just don't need that in the world right now. But we were talking quite a lot about, you know, the ideological subversion back to the cultural Marxism and, you know, different things like this, and it potentially being either part of, or at least, you know, maybe hijacked and used for further political, you know, means moving forward. And it seems like everything that's happening this year from the beginning to today is pushing this. I don't really want to kind of call it left agenda, but I don't know what else to call it, if I'm honest. But it's almost like pushing us towards this globalism type, you know, process, and, you know, Marxism and socialism and these factors. So I'd be interested to kind of hear your thoughts on that, Tom, and yeah, to see if you can kind of make sense of this and maybe piece it together for people that aren't as maybe well read as you are on these subjects.
Okay, yeah, well, with the rights themselves, one thing that's kind of concerning me is the use of identity politics and the kind of narrative of white privilege that's being promulgated by the Black Lives Matter crowd. But when these riots first started, I just want to preface what I'm going to say with this. When these riots first started, they were peaceful, and I think they were kind of hijacked by Antifa and paid thugs. So the actual protest and march in itself and what they were for, I'm fully behind that. What we're kind of talking here more about is movements like this being used for subversion to kind of pit people against one another. And I think what we're starting to see now here is a kind of a fomenting of a class war, or a kind of race war, and it's all kind of predicated on the idea of white privilege. So I think in terms of white privilege, there's simply too many variables other than race that determine individual success in America. You know, if it were true that there was white privilege, an interesting stat is that whites commit suicide at twice the rate of black people. So if white men, who the left argue are the most privileged group of all in America, commit 7 out of every 10 suicides, I think it is. Where is this privilege coming from? You know, like the there's a lot of underprivileged areas in the States where very poor white people live alongside black people. So it's not it's a very dangerous premise from which to start these conflicts. And I think when we compare it to the 1960s with the MLK movement, the black community was marching to gain equal rights under the legislation and law. When we compare it with that, that movement had direction in that they were aiming to be seen as equal citizens. But here we just see rioting, looting by a group that is actually becoming an anti-white movement. So they're fighting racism with racism. So it doesn't really sound like they'll do a lot to end racism, you know. So at least in the 60s they marched for construction, but this is for destruction. So I think that's the main difference between the two here. And as I said previously, my main concern here is that at a time when everyone needed to come together to kind of question the government's lockdown, we have this division, and I think the end goal of this that we could see is that we'll see hate speech laws and attempt to legislate equality, which will lead to further division amongst people. So in terms of ideological subversion, I think people need to understand that underlying all of this is the proclivity of the mainstream media to engage in psychological warfare against the masses. So we've already briefly touched on that today. But have you guys heard of Edward Bernays? He was the father of public relations in the United States, the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Have you guys heard of him before?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, I actually shared. I don't use Facebook as often as I once did over the years, but I shared one of his quotes. I might have even got it from yourself, Tom. It read, "If one can design propaganda or psychological operations that bypass the conscious and rational faculties of the individual, it is possible to move people to adopt beliefs and behaviours without them being aware of the underlying motivations leading them."
Perfect, yeah. That's exactly it. So Bernays was interested in finding out how one's psychology changes when becoming part of a group, so part of a race, class, gender, ideology, politics. So looking at the work of Freud and Bernays, because Bernays derived his findings from Freud, and a French psychologist called Gustave Le Bon, who studied group psychology as well. The powers that be kind of saw the potential of taking these insights and transforming them into methods that could be used to control people. So when you participate in a group or a crowd, and it doesn't have to be physical, it's also a state of mind. Your behavior and thinking will change. So that's why I mentioned the Asch experiment. So one thing Freud pointed out was that many of man's thoughts and actions are actually compensatory substitutes for desires which he has been obliged to suppress. So the issue for someone being involved in Black Lives Matter can be that they were venting their frustrations and blaming white racism for how they feel. But the problem here is that you then frame yourself victim to something external when your true power to actually change anything comes from within. So you're almost fighting a ghost, you know. So if you design propaganda to bypass the unconscious mind, as Ben was saying, you can play on people's suppressed emotions and get them to adopt beliefs which they believe is helping them, but is actually serving a different agenda. So if you look at the media,
you can't reason, you can't have an adult conversation at the moment, especially if you're white, because there's
you're
always
thinking
something
in terms
more.
of the crowd.
Yeah, and it makes you think, do you want, what do you want here? Do you want things to progress and be better, or do you want me to get on my knees, and do you want me to feel the pain that you're feeling? Because you can't, how you just can't reason with that, you know. And I actually saw someone on Facebook. I deleted Facebook for like 2.5 years, and I recently went back on like an absolute idiot. Anyway, went on there, and I wrote on there. She was, you know, going on about this whole movement, and I said, look, I'm fully with you. I fully agree. You know, I feel your pain. But one thing I have noticed is this white guilt, and you know, I can't feel guilty for being born as something. You know, I've never been part of any of what's going on in the world. Can we have an adult conversation about it? And her response, and among other people, I was in the lion's den on this one, by the way, and they were mugging me right off, and they were saying like, no, like you're the first person that said this. I think you're full of bullshit. I was like, I'm probably the first person that said it because I've probably got the balls to say it, you know, and you lot are absolutely ruining me right now, making an example of me on Facebook because no one else had the balls to say it, and no one else is gonna say it going forward because they know this is the reaction, you know. And in a way, I kind of wanted that reaction because I wanted it to be on the surface, and I wanted to kind of confirm the way I was feeling, but they didn't want to know. And this girl said, look, I'm happy to talk to you and educate you, she said to me, on over private message. So I was like, okay, cool. I sent her loads of research talking about, you know, like we're saying, the ideological subversion, talking about Black Lives Matter. As I actually put a Twitter thread about it, you know, who funds it, you know, what their beliefs are, the link with the feminist movement and all of this stuff. She's not even read it yet. I sent it like a week ago. I ended up just deleting her in the end. I deleted her on Facebook. I thought, you're not even going to read it. You don't even care about the truth. You just want other people to feel the pain that you're feeling. But probably the pain that you've actually never felt. You're just feeling it through other people, you know. So sorry to hijack there, but I can see it, you know, and there is no reason for some of the people, you know.
Seeing the world through identity politics, through like groups, but the world isn't made up of this amorphous idea of the collective. It's made up of individuals. Like individuals make up a group, but anything that's been ever pushed forward has been through a singular person. You know, it hasn't come in the form of the group. So what happened to the idea of denouncing individuals for doing things? You know, if you apply class guilt and group shame, you end up with something like we had in Bolshevik Russia, Nazi Germany. You know, that's where people are going with this, and I wonder if they know how dangerous it is, and if that's what they're actually doing, if they realize that they're going down the same route that led to, I think it was 60 million dead in Bolshevik Russia when the Bolsheviks declared that all the kulaks, the Russian farmers, that because they were making money off making food, that they were oppressing everybody else, and therefore all their food had to be taken and they had to be killed. Well, if you kill the people that are making the country's food, you get massive famine, and that's exactly what happened. So it's true, seeing everybody with this through this group lens. You know, it's the people turn off their faculty to actually critically think about what they're saying. And if you look at people who are doing this, you can actually see in their eyes that they're ideologically possessed. You know, like something has taken over them, and they're actually like projecting this kind of archetype or stereotype onto you, and they're not responding to what you're saying. They're responding to the idea that you are opposing them, and that their idea is the only idea that can be heard or is true. Yeah. So if you look at the media,
happens all the time. It happens all the time. Like it happens within even, you know, cryptocurrency communities on Twitter. Like I was saying to someone, actually it was when I was out on the bike the other day, and I was like, do you remember when we wouldn't even get on with the next postcode? Like when we were at school, colour didn't matter. You're fighting for our postcode, and we don't like this school that's next to ours, and we're fighting them. That's what it was when I was at school. Colour was irrelevant. Religion, no one cared. We're fighting because we're from this area, and you're from that area. You know, it's always been there. It's tribalism, and you don't realise until you look back in hindsight, or you step outside and you think, I was part of a cult. Same as like we were talking before about diet as well. you got at the moment it's the vegans versus the carnivores, and I'm part of the carnivore movement, and I talk a lot about it, but I'm seeing that that's culty as well, and I don't like it. But because I've been subverged to these cults before, mind cults, I can see it quite easy. Whereas, if you haven't been in any before, you kind of don't realise. And you start saying things that you don't believe in, and you can't reason with it because my coin's better than your coin,
Yeah.
So it's not even just that; it's almost the way it seems to go. And we were talking about the ideological subversion, and one of the the guy that I learned about this through was that Yuri Bezmenov. So what he's saying, so he's branding, and this hit me quite hard when I heard him say it, when he says about the useful idiots, right? And he's not fluffing pillows when he says this. He's straight in there. The useful idiots, and the useful idiots are us in general, the masses, and we're all being played against each other as useful idiots, right? And what he's saying, and this is the best part, and I'd love to hear your kind of views on this as well. When a culture or a system or whatever is or a collection of people is kind of set up in the foundation, within the foundation there's discrimination and racism and equality. And you look at the West, I mean, the level of equality now is so low in comparison to most other countries or cultures, or even compared to, say, even 20, 30 years ago, let alone going further. But there's something built in the fabric of a culture that when the time's right, you can pick that out and there's a legitimate cause. So, for instance, the whole race thing, there's a legitimate cause there. And there's two factors with Black Lives Matter. There's the statement, Black Lives Matter. And I've said this multiple times. Matter is such a low ball of a word. I hate that word. You matter. Like, matter. What does matter mean? It's like, I don't know what, I probably could suggest a better word. But matter is like such a low ball. But the fact, like the statement of Black Lives Matter is like, yeah, of course they do. No one denies that unless you're completely backwards. And I think most of society would look at people that do deny that and say, you're not right. That's weird. But then there's the political movement of Black Lives Matter, which is something completely different. So I think what a lot of people have done is they've just looked at the whole thing as one, and they are behind the whole thing as one. Whereas I think you need to kind of look closer and see that one of them are, like we said, the left, I think, have really kind of politicized one aspect. And I tweeted about certain things that I was uncomfortable about, and I'm open about that. Whereas the statement, of course, it goes without saying, we shouldn't even have to say that. But like going back to the point with the white and black thing or any other cultures, there was discrimination, 100%, and we could point at that all day long, and we could feel the pain, and we could be riddled with guilt and ashamed of what's happened. But we need to kind of understand, like, why are we doing that? You've got to ask the question, why? Are we doing it so we can pull apart this culture and destroy culture? Or are we doing it so we can draw a line and move progressively? And I think that's what he pushes on the most, is it's there for a reason, and they're pulling it for a reason, and it is a legitimate cause. So you can't go against that cause, because then you are deemed as a racist.
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's all about dividing a population into smaller and smaller groups that are prone to clash, and then the effects of group psychology kick in, and it makes it highly likely for these. It makes it highly unlikely for these groups to have any rational discourse, and that leads to a hostile conflict. And the smaller and smaller you can break a society into groups, the more you can ward them against each other. So it seems to be all about that. And before we touch on Yuri Bezmenov, I want to talk a bit about the Frankfurt School, because this seemed to be one of the main avenues that brought in cultural Marxism, critical theory, and this kind of attack on Western morality and tradition that we see. So I just want to read out their 11-point plan to advance their quiet revolution, or so they call it. So,
Just before you do that, can you tell us when was this wrote, by the way, just so we have a reference here of a
I think
date?
this was post World War II, was it not, Tim?
yeah, so I'll go back a bit, and I'll get into how the kind of Frankfurt School started first. So
Okay, yeah.
it started with Karl Marx. So his idea was basically that the workers of the world would unite and they would rise up to defeat capitalism to create this utopian Marxist society. So when the First World War broke out, the workers of the world did not unite, but aligned with their countries to fight each other. So a few years later, a few Marxist underlings did a kind of post-mortem on this, and they realized that the kind of political Marxism and that people would naturally rise up against their governments and overthrow capitalism because they realized it was oppressing them. They realized that failed, and they had to kind of shift gears from using politics to subverting the culture. So a guy called Antonio Gramsci came up with the idea that you could undermine the West through the intentional collapse of the social structure, advocating class, social, cultural warfare. So this was before the Frankfurt School was inaugurated, which I think was 1924. It was sometime in the 1920s. But these Marxist German Jews, they took Gramsci's ideas and they set up the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, Germany in the 1920s. But when Hitler came into power, they quickly fled and they migrated to the United States, where they then set to work to attempt to subvert mainly academia, media, and the colleges. They went first to New York City and then to California and Berkeley, I think it was. But the Frankfurt School intellectuals basically combined the work of Gramsci, Karl Marx, and Freud to create cultural Marxism, which led to political correctness and critical theory. So cultural Marxism is basically political correctness, which is simply a strategy that the left use to silence the right. So critical theory itself is the idea that no Western value system is immune from being attacked. So this kind of comes from Freud, in that everyone under capitalism, whether they realize it or not, they're being subjugated, they're being oppressed. So it means that critical theory kind of took this idea and they said, if that is true, then that means we can attack anything in Western society. We can vandalize any concept, deconstruct anything, and it will be valid because Western society itself is toxic and oppressive, and anyone disagreeing with them was then therefore labeled a racist, homophobe, xenophobe. So that's the kind of sleight of hand that they use. So they basically sought for the destruction of traditional religion and the kind of underlying Christian culture. And I know people will kind of say, what's the big deal there? And it's that we kind of took our objective morality from Christian culture, and that our idea of the nuclear family comes from Christianity. So what happens when you remove that is you get something like situational ethics, where people can in the moment decide, is this right for me? And there's no objective base from which they decide what's right and wrong. So it led to moral relativism over the 20th century, and undermines the family. And with that, they also sought to infiltrate and demolish the existing institutions. So they promoted things like feminism, communism, atheism, globalism, secular humanism, which is where situational ethics come from, the idea that you can make up your own right and wrong, and the idea that God didn't create the universe, that it's always been self-sustaining. So if we're just like bags of flesh floating on a rock, well then is there any meaning or like value, which leads into nihilism, and if you're nihilist, you may as well be hedonist. You may as well enjoy your time here. So it led to all this moral degradation, and I think you could say most of this came out of the Frankfurt School. Some of it was already definitely implicit in capitalism itself, because capitalism is based on liberalism, which is based on the idea that the individual can decide for himself what he can do with his life, and that does sound good in itself, but in absence of objective morals, that can be actually very destructive, because if you're a liberal yet you haven't got any morals, pretty much anything goes, and that's pretty much happened with these individuals. So their 11-point plan, I'm not sure of the exact time when this came out, but it was close to the start of the inauguration when they started the Frankfurt School. But their 11-point plan for this quiet revolution was: one, the creation of racism offences. So instantly that links back in with Black Lives Matter, and it's why I think it's a precursor to hate speech laws. Down the line, the government officials can say, well, we have to do something about this, and because under the law, blacks and whites are the same. There's no like institutional or like legislative racism. They're not legally, the black community is not legally below the white community. Because of that, I think that they're going to end up bringing in these race laws, and it's going to be, I think this is many decades in the works. But that's the first one. The second one was continual change to create confusion. I think we're always seeing this, like we think as a society we have a basis and we understand what's going along, and then something else comes along, feminism, transgender. Oh, you can't and say that. History is constantly being uprooted and changed. The third one is the teaching of sex and homosexuality to children to promote promiscuity. So I think we're seeing that more and more in the West, that these sex ed classes are being taught to children who are younger and younger, and I think we can all agree that no kids should be kind of being taught about sex ed at that age. If it's going to happen, it should be at least at a kind of later age. But now we're seeing things like what's it called again, where the transvestites would come in and read them story hour, and it would be 4-year-olds. So we're confusing kids about gender.
I saw in amongst some of the madness recently during lockdown, I believe, if I'm right, it was the World Health Organization. Obviously they've been taking quite a battering from people that have been looking into their corruptions, and somebody brought up the fact that they're trying to, or they've got a protocol or a series of books or something to that effect for the ages of 0 to 4 for sex education.
That is horrendous.
And when you go through it, I mean, I'm not encouraging anybody to look it up, but like if you really need it confirming, then be my guest. But
mate, I'd be homeschooling. I'm out. There's no way. There's no way. They've just come out now and said they've said that SpongeBob's gay. SpongeBob SquarePants.
I saw that, yeah.
Well, he's gay. What? Do you know? But what? Didn't the creator of SpongeBob just die as well about 6 months ago? Now they've come out and they probably hijacked SpongeBob.
That's interesting, because I remember a few years ago that the creator did publicly say that SpongeBob is asexual. Like his like words were he's a sponge. He's asexual. Like he has no genitalia. So he did say that years ago. So it's interesting that you say that he's passed away, and it seems like they're definitely virtue signaling to the LGBT community.
You mentioned about one of them is to undermine the family and to underline the nuclear family, right? The nuclear family structure. I remember as I was doing some research on the BLM yesterday. So the 11th, so out of the 13 underlying principles, number 11 is Black villages. We are committed to disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages. I mean, it sounds great. That sounds great. But what you're saying is more likely the case, where it's undermining, like, it's almost like society is going to raise your children, or even Big Brother is going to raise your children now, where as a family you don't really have a say how your child's raised anymore. You know, it's pulling, exactly like you said, it's sort of pulling that responsibility from the parents. It should be the parents, I think, that educate the child as to what's right and wrong, and, you know, building up that moral system. If the child's moral system is built up in today's society, we're raising a pack of psychopaths going forward, because it's a mess right now.
There you go, mate. I mean, catch this for the ultimate version of being a subverted people. I mean, I don't like the term sheep for the masses, but when you hear something like this, you can't help but refer to that as a description for people that are victims of this radicalization and subversion. Because here's the World Health Organization that people will use as a point of reference to back their argument as to who we should be looking for advice and guidelines on something such as COVID-19, and saying, well, the World Health Organization says, and they're very proud to use the World Health Organization as evidence to back their point of view. And yet here's the World Health Organization giving guidelines out for sex education for the ages of children from 0 to 4. And I'm reading this because I've looked it up while you've been talking, and this is pretty graphic. They are to be taught about masturbation and gender identity. The World Health Organization advises children aged 0 to 4 are given information about the enjoyment and pleasure of touching one's body.
Oh my God, that is so fucked up.
Like you said,
that's stripping. That is stripping the innocence out of a child immediately.
I think that comes from UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, which is actually being funded by Bill Gates. I think some of these came in under the Common Core educational system in the United States a few years ago, and have more recently come in Europe. But again, it's for any logical person. How can you look at that and think that's what kids should be learning at that age? Like the concept of sex and sexuality doesn't come into a child's head until much later. So when you introduce it at that young of an age, you're kind of guaranteeing that you're confusing that like child, and it could lead to gender dysphoria and all sorts of problems. So it's unbelievable.
I think, like, who's going to impose that? Because let's be honest, the majority don't like that idea. Like I was saying to you earlier, we're at a point now where the minority rules, which is absurd. I can't get my head around it. The majority of people, 100 people in a room, I guarantee you, probably 100 people would say that's wrong. So who's going to impose that? That's what worries me. And what's it going to take for people to go against their better judgment and actually impose that? You know, my daughter goes to school, and her teachers are lovely. You know, they're not they wouldn't have it in them to do that. I'd be shocked. So I'm like, how does that happen? Does it get to a point where these? I don't know. I can't understand how that would even happen.
Yeah, I think what's important to note here is like, as much as we're touching on these like sensitive and quite shocking points, and it, like you say, Jay, like you can't see anybody realistically imposing that. Like, are we as society that far radicalized, let's say, or subverted, as we're talking about subversion? Does it overwhelm what we, class as common sense, like human instinctive common sense? I saw a quote today from somebody, and they said the media is the real virus, people's behaviours is the real pandemic, the cure is common sense. It's like, so if you've got guidelines like that out there, surely common sense must prevail. And I do hold personal hope and faith in humanity that eventually we're all going to be like, hang on a sec, this is bullshit.
Yeah. But I tell you what, the things I've seen over Twitter recently have shocked me. I got in one too many battles with vegans, and I'm talking like not plant-based eaters. I'm talking hardcore, you know, go to the farm and bloody, I don't know, whatever crazy stuff they're doing to the farmers, these type of people. And I was shocked at what I was seeing. It was unreal. I was going on some of their Twitter pages, and in the bio, you'd see it 100 times, 100 out of 100. It'd be pronouns, that was always there. Climate change was always there. Pictures and graphic videos of animals being slaughtered in the slaughterhouses, that was always there, all over their walls. And I'm like, how can you say anything? You're obviously brainwashed to even have that. If I didn't agree with animals being slaughtered, I wouldn't have pictures of them everywhere because I'd be disgusted by it. You know what I mean? Like, you're against, like, right now, and David Icke was talking about this in his last interview, like, we're talking about race, but what about all the kids that are going missing and the paedophilia in, like, the Epstein and stuff like that? If you're massively against that, which we all are, I think it's fair to say, you wouldn't have pictures of it all over your Twitter wall.
Yeah, why are we not taking to the street?
Yeah, but, like, these people, they're radicalized, and I can see it, and it worries me how many are on Twitter. But like I said earlier, it's easy to flick through Twitter and find yourself in these pockets of these communities and convincing yourself that we're fucked because everyone's just messed up. They are a small number, thank God. But they exist, man. They exist. These people exist, and they are scary. They scare me. If I see slaughtered animals all over someone's Twitter, now I'm blocking. These people can't even know who I am. I can't have it.
I just see this as like unilaterally. I just categorize it as all. It's politics. Like you're describing veganism versus carnivore and things like that previously, and that's like food politics and Tom's mentioned like identity politics. For me, politics, it's a battle between evil collectivism and righteous individualism. It's just politics is just there's so much time wasted on it, and yet could you ask the question, would we work without it?
Yeah, well, my next point actually, and I was going to bust it in as a bit of a joke, which I think I will. Can't we get back to real politics tomorrow when the Premier League starts again? That's the politics I want to be talking about. But I didn't think that I thought I'd be okay, but I thought I'd struggle more than I have. But I didn't think a lot of people that I knew would be able to go without sport for as long as they have. And I tell you what, no one's really talking about it. If football's back on tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to watching Arsenal play again, I wonder how bothered I am by it.
You'll change your mind once you watch them.
I was going to say, I think that depends where you are in the country, mate. Because where I'm from, everybody's buzzing about it.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm excited, but I can't believe how long we've gone and people aren't that bothered. Right. I always have Talk Sport on in the car, like as my default. I'll put music on, podcasts, things like that as my general go-to. But as I get in the car, turn it on, it's always Talk Sport. And I've listened to a couple of shows when I'm driving over this period, like this lockdown and stuff. And they're just waffling on. There's nothing to talk about.
Yeah, when
and you can just hear them carrying it.
Well, interesting you bring up sports as politics that you want to talk about. I mean, I've been doing a lot of research into Roman history and amongst other things, and how it stems and relates into today's society, and the sports industrial complex. Like the correlation that I'm sort of reaching at here is, I think it was a famous Roman poet by the name of Juvenal, wrote the infamous ideas of give them bread and circuses and they will never revolt. Well, modern day sports is nothing more than the modern day bread and circuses, as it were. I mean, we all know the gladiatorial.
Is that why we're revolting right now? Because we haven't had our fix? Is that
Well,
why? Because you probably got, at this March, you probably had a black guy who's a Chelsea fan fighting a white guy who's a Chelsea fan. And chances are, on game day, they may have actually been together shouting at Arsenal fans. Do you know what I mean?
Mate,
So,
I had to stop myself then, because I was going to say, well, you picked a bad club to use as an example there, but I would instantly take that comment back, because I'm a West Bromwich Albion supporter from the West Midlands in the UK, and we're just as bad as any club, and yet we pride ourselves on, and rightly so, for being quite pioneer with accepting that racism should not be allowed and it should be kicked out. We've got quite a history. We have some famous black players that went by the name of the 3 Degrees, Cyril Regis, Brendan Batson and Laurie Cunningham. Laurie Cunningham was the first black player to ever play for Real Madrid. And I believe one of the first black players to play for England, and he was unbelievable. I mean, I've only ever watched DVDs that my dad brought me up watching. But even our club, like you mentioned the link between football and racism and what's going on currently, like the protests, you're right. Some of these people will now go and sit together. Well, not under the guidelines, because there's no fans at games anymore. But if it were allowed, yeah, they'd be sitting amongst each other.
Oh, I bet. And it just shows how fickle we are.
Mm.
You know, and fickle in a good way in this sense, because you wouldn't want race wars, anymore. You know, going forward, you don't want to see that anywhere. Imagine if it kicks off in a football stadium. Like, what is that? But all it takes is your favourite player, who's a different colour skin to you, goes and scores a goal, and you've forgot about it now, have you?
Well,
you know,
everybody needs to, if nothing else, from all this mess that's going on around us, take some time and really think about your own morals and your own ideas towards the subjects that are relevant right now, and we've all got a responsibility to educate and share information with each other instead of just tearing each other down, because I've learned myself through all this, there's so little I did know on topics such as Black history. Like, while we've still got the chance, I know this is a different topic altogether, but while we've still got the chance, we should be making the most of books.
Yeah. Buy them now, because once it's taken off the internet, there's no access anymore.
Mm.
But I was saying to someone the other day, and I think this is so simple, but probably impossible. But we could change the world right this second, yeah? And I'll explain, number one, how it would work, and number two, the fact that it can be done, yeah? So if you look at reality is nothing more than your subconscious mind reflecting back at you what it believes that you believe consciously that the world is, right? So it's itself reflecting itself back on itself based on what it believes itself to believe, right? Can we agree on that? Tom, sorry, would you agree on that one?
First explanation, yes, I do.
So if that's what it is, yeah, it's all to do with how you perceive it on a, I guess, more of a subconscious level, right? But if we all just right now decided to create a better world and to look at the world in its beauty, like it has, the beauty is always there. You maybe just don't see it, I think it's fair to say. So if we all just do better right now and offer more on a local level compassion to everyone and anybody that comes in our path right now from today, including ourselves, get rid of all guilt and shame, be compassionate to yourself first, and then be compassionate on a local level to anyone who crosses your path, and just remind yourself to do that every day. If we all do that collectively and individually, of course, we will change the world within an instant.
That sounds like a philosopher's wet dream.
I think it's that simple. Problem is, most bonehead, knucklehead, bloody knuckle-dragging morons would completely disagree if that's even possible. You'd have loads of like people on the left like arguing about semantics, and then we'd all just end up fighting about what I've just said. But just listen to what I said. It's very simple. We all know it. Like intuitively, we know that. And if we just did that from tomorrow or today, right now, I think we can change the world immediately. I think it's that simple. Just be a good person to yourself, number one, because guilt and shame, which is what we're seeing right now, guilt and shame on each other and ourselves is horrendous. I've spoken to you guys before where I think that is, like we're saying that we're being forced to live in fear. I think we're also being forced to live in shame and guilt. And I think it's so destructive. It's ridiculous. So if we can strip that and
especially given all this white privilege and kind of class war stuff where you're seeing like white people kneeling in front of black people, it's like, where's that shame coming from, and why do you feel shameful for the guilt of your ancestors and all that?
Exactly. So my shame makes you feel liberated? Is that progressive? Or if I shake your hand and go, do you know what, mate? Let me buy you a coffee. You look like you've had a tough day. I know what's going on. Let's talk about it. You know, look someone in the eye, talk to them. I'll buy you a coffee. Let's have a chat. Yeah, no, I get that. That's really bad. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I agree. How do we move forward? Look, I'm giving you respect. I'm showing you respect. If we just do that, it's so simple. The world will change. But I think that's the nightmare of the system. Because as soon as we do that, it won't take long before we start progressing in a different direction. You start thinking, we don't really need government anymore to the level that we have them. Do we need the police? We're all getting on. You know, we're all getting on. It's all good. Yeah, and I know I'm talking in the sense of like dreamland here. Don't get me wrong, because I understand that this is, you know, a million billion miles away. But ultimately, it is doable if we're all serious about it and if we all genuinely want it. And then the system crumbles because we don't bloody need it. Do we need war? You know, I could go on and it starts becoming a bit new agey. But ultimately, if we just all do better ourselves, stop looking at how other people should suffer and the guilt that they should have, and they need to know about my story. You know, no one needs to know about your story other than you, and you need to rectify it, and you need to overcome the shame and the guilt and stop pushing it on other people and deal with it yourself and let them deal with their own struggle. You know, when I was out with my friend the other day, again, that I was talking about earlier, he goes, I don't assume anything out of people. If a white person's saying things that I find offensive, and I loved this, it blew me away when he said it. He goes, I don't know what they're going through. I don't know how their day's been. I don't know what struggles they're going through. They may have just lost someone, you know? And I was like blown away that he was that courteous, because that doesn't happen. And, you know, we're talking to a black guy right now in the heat of all of this, and that's what he said. And I thought, mate, you are brilliant. I love that. I'm so glad you said that. That is brilliant. Can you just say that a little bit more? And hopefully people hear that. And because you don't know, you know, we're talking about white guilt collectively, but white people are damaged as well. And there's problems that they face, like you said, suicide rates. And especially with COVID, you know, we could have been at that march and you're screaming at a white person, calling them racist. It might be the first time they've left their house in 4 months and they live at home alone. And they're just desperate to get out of the house and they've got caught up in some load of old rubbish and now you're abusing them. You know, we just don't know what people are going through.
Yeah, I think the core of the problem is self-responsibility, you know, taking responsibility for how you think, how you feel, how you act. And going back to our conversation about group psychology, I think this is why and how people get swept up into this group mindset is they don't want to take personal responsibility. So if they join the group or the crowd, they don't have to be responsible because anything that happens now is the crowd. It's the group. You know, it's a huge weight to take responsibility for your own destiny. So it's easier just to kind of fit in and to go along with what someone else is doing. So I think that's what the majority of people are doing.
Yeah, but then your individual karma, guilt and shame,
Yeah.
cause and effect, those things are individual, but people don't know that. They think like, yeah, it's part of the gang, it's hidden. I wore a mask, no one knows. It doesn't really work like that. When you're looking at, universal law, it's going to come back to you individually, and there is no crowd that's going to protect you. But people don't know that, unfortunately. And I'm just thinking, as I've hijacked and rambled for a little while, and I'm glad I did that, by the way, because I needed to get that off my chest. You were going through the principles, and I think you got to about number 4.
Yeah, so you're
Did you want to carry on there, or?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, so the last one we mentioned before our digression was the teaching of sex ed to young children, and then the one after that is the undermining of schools and teachers' authority. The next one is huge immigration to destroy identity, and I think this is what we see a lot as well, is that the immigration that's being brought into the West. Like, I'm not against immigration. I think to a certain extent it's fine, but the people that they're bringing in aren't being forced or aren't being made to assimilate to the culture. And what that does in itself is it creates pockets of groups who are against the culture in which they find themselves. So that can be the problem with mass immigration. So that was one of their early goals, was to cause a huge immigration, which could then be later turned around. And then if you embolden those minorities and pit them against the majority, well, then you get what we're getting now in the States. So that was number 5. Number 6 was the promotion of excessive drinking. Number 7, the emptying of churches. Number 8, an unreliable legal system with bias against victims of crime. Number 9, dependency on the state or state benefits. And I think this is really what's going to be the outcome of the COVID crisis. So we're seeing small businesses shut, and most people are almost completely dependent on the state because they've lost their job, and I think that's only going to get worse. Like on all the biggest corporations are picking up all of the business that the smaller businesses lost. So at the back of this, we're going to be in a situation where socialism is almost inevitable, because a lot of people are going to be relegated to the bottom rung, and they're going to be looking up, and they're not going to be thinking in terms of ethics or morals, being like, oh, it's okay to take from Peter to give to Paul. They're going to be feeling hard done by the world, and it's going to very easily transfigure into a two-tier society, I feel. And yeah, that was.
Yeah, I think the more we see central bank printing, bailouts, reckless spending, drug laws, gun laws, militarization of police and police state. There is no conservative, there is no Labour. If anything, it's just complete state. It's statist, like you say, Tom. It's just an advancement towards socialism.
Exactly. So that was number 9. Number 10 is controlling and dumbing down of media, and number 11 was encouraging the breakdown of the family. So
it just sounds like every conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
Like how you start on conspiracy, and you start, because you can, every single thing that you've just said, you can see clearly, and you can see it's not going away and it's progressing. I mean, some of these factors, like you said, the sex education thing, I mean, that's relatively new, so it's definitely not in order. But you can't deny this. I might use this actually in debate going forward to people that are struggling to understand, because you can't deny this, you can't deny it, so.
Well, I think what happens is people see all of this change, and this is probably 95% of people. There's 2 theories of history. There's the accidental theory of history, and then there's the conspiratorial theory of history. So right now we're obviously going through the conspiratorial conspiratorial theory of history. But most people would ascribe all of this change we're seeing as just, it's accidental. It's just we're going with the winds of change, we're seeing all this decadence, and it's kind of rational, and it's just the kind of end times of capitalism. If you go back, at the end of any major empire like system, we do see this degeneracy. So people could then argue, well, this is accidental and there's no larger conspiracy at play. But then it's when you actually look into what's going on, and you look into things like the Frankfurt School, you do start to look at it differently. And Frankfurt School is just one kind of case study here, and there's multiple different ones to show how the West has been subverted. So the next one I was going to get into was the findings of the Reece Committee in 1954. Have you guys heard of this?
No.
I've heard you mention it, I think, before.
Yeah, I think I posted in an article into our chat a few days ago. But okay, so basically, in the 1950s, a guy called Norman Dodd was the chief investigator for this committee, which was basically set up to investigate the activities of tax-exempt foundations in the US and what they were doing, because they were pooling lots of money in, and people were getting curious as to what they were doing. So foundations under the microscope were Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, and what they found out was that when they were looking into the minutes of their meetings and what they were up to, they found out that they were investigating and actively funding means for the best way to alter the lives and thinking of the American people. So they came to the conclusion that war was the best way to change people's mindsets. But when it came to peacetime, they needed a new tactic, and so sought to infiltrate and fund the public school system to inculcate collectivist ideology into kids, to get them to turn away from their traditional identity so that they could align with the UNESCO tenets that wanted to kind of sublimate America into the New World Order, the new way, or the how would you say, New World, essentially. So that's they were funding means in which to transform the education system. Sorry. So from there, education in the United States kind of turned toward globalism and started to attack the traditions of the country, and schooling went from being about simple reading, writing, and maths to being instruments for social change. So in 1954, the committee's final report found that the larger foundations were directly supporting subversion and actively supporting attacks upon the social system by financing and promoting collectivist ideas. So when I was researching all this, I was kind of dumbfounded, because I was thinking, why would the largest capitalist foundations be funding socialism? I read a book about a year ago called None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen, and he was basically investigating these foundations as well. And I took this quote because it perfectly sums up what I'm trying to say here. Because when you think about capitalism versus socialism, you think, why would a large capitalist fund socialist ventures? Wouldn't they be the ones most likely to lose their wealth? Would they not be fighting against this? So what Gary Allen says in his book is, if one understands that socialism is not a share the wealth program, but is in reality a method to consolidate and control the wealth, then the seeming paradox of super rich men promoting socialism becomes no paradox at all. Instead, it becomes the logical, even the perfect tool of power-seeking megalomaniacs. Communism, or more accurately, socialism, is not a movement of the downtrodden masses, but of the economic elite. It is a movement created, manipulated, and used by power-seeking billionaires in order to gain control over the world, first by establishing social governments in the various nations, and then consolidating them all through a great merger into an all-powerful world socialist superstate, probably under the auspices of the United Nations. So I think that perfectly sums up what we see going on and kind of reconciles that paradox of why we would be seeing these billionaires funding these methods in which to inculcate collectivist thinking into the schooling system, and this went all through academia, through the media. So very interesting, and it was very interesting that even though those findings were legit, it was never picked up. I think Rockefeller came out and kind of weekly denounced the findings and said there was no clear evidence of anything that was being said, when if you read it, there of course was.
Yeah.
Do you not find that funny? You hear that all the time, and mainly in the fact-checking sites. There is no clear evidence. I must read that 3 or 4 times a day when they're trying to debunk these type of things.
Thank God for Snopes.
As soon as you said that, I was getting out.
Think if we had Snopes.
Yeah. Oh God.
You saying, Jay? Sorry.
Sorry, say that again.
No, I was just saying, thank God we have Snopes. It's the fact-checking website. It's like if you have Snopes, no one has to think for themselves. Like it's actually great.
Yeah. It's now like the top 3 bloody first options on Google. I think there's like 3 different ones now, telling you how to think on any subject that you type in. And it's always that there is no clear evidence of. Oh.
Yeah. And like notice if you ever ask those questions and you do type them into Google, they always come up to the top. It's as if the search results are biased to show you these fact-checking sites.
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah.
100%. When people try and debate and they use fact-checking sites, I'm like, I'm out. You've lost me, mate.
Yeah,
that's not proof of anything.
That people use that one with me so many times. As soon as they send me, but Snopes says, I'm just like, right, this conversation's going nowhere. Like, if you were to just look into Snopes itself, like you mentioned the word the left, or the idea of the left. Just look into, use a search engine outside of Google and type in Snopes leftist funding, and there's a whole different perception of what fact-checking sites are really about.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, Ben, weren't we? DuckDuckGo. I use it for everything now. I don't. Tom,
Yes.
You probably know more. Obviously, you work within sort of IT software and security and stuff. Is DuckDuckGo? Would you suggest it's a decent, legitimate source of security as well?
I've been using it for a long time now. The problem with this is that most times when people are using DuckDuckGo, they're actually using it in their Chrome browser. So when I've looked online, like I've got the app on my phone, but if I try to use it on my laptop, I'm using it through Chrome. I'm not convinced that the analytics don't still get sent to Google. I think even using VPN services these days, like anything you do online isn't secure. So it's definitely an improvement of using Google products. But like, I mean, if you're looking to not be tracked, it's not going to make a difference really. But I do notice that when you use Google Chrome and Firefox and such, every single request that you send off to any website, any search that you make, analytics get sent to Google, Facebook, and lots of different servers. So you send off one request, but in the background, that data from what you've typed is being sent to multiple sources around the world. I haven't checked how that works with DuckDuckGo. I presume it either doesn't happen, or it happens to a much lesser extent? If it does still happen, there's no difference.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
I think I was listening to. It's quite fresh in my mind. This topic of like internet censorship and data harvesting and search engines. I was listening to a podcast recently on the power control that Google has of the internet per se. There's a documentary on, I believe it's on Amazon. I'd encourage everybody to go and watch it if you haven't, and it really sort of gives you the ins and outs of what you're up against with such a monopoly that is Google. It goes by the name of the Creepy Line, and I think there's a doctor on there. I think he's called Dr. Epstein. No relation to Jeffrey.
Oh God, back here again.
Yeah, he covers the whole concept of Google and data analytics and all the harvesting and that's being collected to promote this new 5G world and data-driven world. I mean, I think it was another documentary that I watched, The Great Hack, the one that was exposing Cambridge Analytica for the Brexit and Donald Trump election campaigns. They made a point on that documentary where they said, I think 2019, was it 2019? I believe it was 2019. It was the first year in human history, or sorry, should I say, since oil has been around. It's the first year since the oil introduction that data surpassed oil itself as the number one commodity in the world. So
that's why I keep saying the new world currency is going to be backed by data.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know how, but it's always backed by or pegged to the leading commodity, you know, and it just so happens right now it's jumped over oil. Petrodollar's dead.
Kind of data, because saying data is pretty abstract. Like, what's the data itself going to be?
Right.
But yeah, that's what I mean. I don't know. It could be like what we're saying. I don't know. God knows. I'm not smart enough to know that much, but I just feel like I can see a trend.
It is interesting you say that, though, because I saw when Chainlink first came about, they got gifts off the World Economic Forum. So from the very start, they were being promoted from high places, and what they're pretty much doing is creating this Oracle service where all data streams can connect. So in a way, you're right. It's like we are going to have this situation in the near future where all of these isolated data sources are all going to be connected up to each other, and they're all going to be shared on these large marketplaces. So all data is going to be monetized. I'm not sure on the actual reserve currency.
Well, it's already happening. It's already happening. So
absolutely,
if you look at YouTube, you like YouTube isn't free. You're paying for YouTube with your data and your privacy, right?
Great point.
So, like, if I was to go on to Discord, or I don't know, I can't even think off the top of my head what the other ones are, where I'm paying, you know, to get someone's. What am I thinking of? We were talking about it the other day.
Patreon.
Like a Patreon, yeah. If I go on someone's Patreon and I pay whatever it costs, I'm not getting ads. They're probably not tracking my movement and collecting my data. They might be, but they're probably not, because I'm paying money. Whereas YouTube, you're paying in data. They're bombarding you with ads, you know, which are based on cookies and all of these type of things. So in a roundabout way, it's probably going to be the flow of data. But I don't know how that's going to work necessarily. But I feel like it's going to happen for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's important to realise that it's already existing compartmentalisation. If you take oil, for example, we're all familiar with it and have known that that's driven economics in terms of being the number one commodity. But when you compartmentalise it, like crude oil, I mean, I might be stood to be corrected here, but facilitates many industries. You know, there's a large part of it is allocated to the pharmaceuticals, a large part to the energy sector, a large part is to plastics, rubber. You know, like it has many uses, and I think data is no different. It's going to be compartmentalized as we move into this new world of data-driven sort of society that will eventually be able to identify clearly as we move forward. Oh, the data for that, data for this, data for that, and we'll all get a better understanding, because it's still realistically adopter phase period of, I think, moving from the information age into the Internet of Things, as they call it.
Yeah. But the thing is, everything is data. Like you know, if I go on holiday somewhere, I now have that data. I've equated the data to what I've seen, touched, smelt, felt. You know, all of these things. So where does it end? Because data is the universe. You know, so I wonder what perimeters that's going to be under. I guess human data. But then again, where's the perimeter there? Is it 5 sensory data, or is it personal algorithmic data based on trends and, you know, based on control, how they can control us, mind control, like I said before? You know, it's an interesting concept, I think.
Well,
there's actually a guy, I shared the interview with you guys. I don't know if you watched it, but I've been banging on about this to everyone, and it's the best interview I've ever heard. A guy called Jet Baker, right? He's a scientist, and he talks about it was brilliant, and it's been taken off YouTube as well. So if you ain't seen it now, then you're out of luck. Sorry, guys. But basically, what he's saying is, he's talking about how they're collecting our data from every perspective. Like, some people would say, well, they're listening to me on my phone, but I don't care. I put it on the kitchen table. I don't use it. Yeah, but it's not about collecting your data as in spying on you, even though it kind of is. What's happening is the AI systems are collecting the data and becoming smarter, and they're building a picture. You're basically creating the hive mind of AI based on our data. And he extensively goes into why and how. And then he starts talking about, I watched it about 2 weeks ago. I've kind of forgot some of the terminology, so I wouldn't even be able to sort of tell you. But he goes into like CERN, you know, and how they created the internet and why they created the internet and all of these things. It's absolutely phenomenal. But the main sort of take is it's going to be AI. And he talks about one thing, and I believe this is fact. We are creators. Human beings are creators. From the very basis, from a simple perspective of what I said earlier, we create our own reality based on what we believe that we want out of our own reality, right? So we're creating based on what we subconsciously believe reality to be. So if you want to hijack reality, you hijack perception, right? Pretty simple concept. I think they already use us to create our reality by hijacking our perceptions of reality. This is like social programming and things like that. You know, they kind of tell you what's going to happen. People argue one of the reasons is because it's shifting karma and all of this stuff. It sort of puts it on the collective karma of humanity. The other one is they have to, because we actually create it ourselves. They're indirectly creating reality through us, ultimately. Once AI has a foothold, it can either shut down our creative ability, which probably wouldn't happen, because I think without us, this doesn't exist anyway. That's why they haven't killed us all. People always say to me, well, why don't they just kill us all? Well, they won't, because they can't. It's not that simple. They need us, right? And we hold the power. You need to understand that. But the AI system can hijack our perception permanently, and there's no going back. And then reality will only ever be exactly what they want it, or what AI wants it to be, via us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or have I lost you?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that the scariest thing about AI is that as it gets better and better, people are going to need to think for themselves less and less. Because if you have data being more and more available, if you have data being shared on these marketplaces, and there's actually a cryptocurrency project right now doing that. It's called Ocean Protocol. They're creating this open, decentralized marketplace where businesses can host their data, monetize it, and then AI algorithms can then purchase that, scan the data, and then use it to get smarter. So as these systems,
God.
yeah, I know. So as these systems advance and this becomes better and better, and we go from handheld tech to actually wearables and implantables. We're already at wearables, of course, but once we get to implantables and that, and we kind of start merging with AI, like Elon Musk wants to do through his Neuralink project. Once it gets to that point, it's like then human consciousness is under massive threat, because you're not going to have to think for yourself. You're going to have this integrated bot that has just access to all knowledge. So why bother thinking? And I think that's one of the end goals. And I think David Icke points this out often, is the end goal is that they create this hive mind where everyone is just the same. You know, it like reminds me of one of those films where you just see the assembly line of bots, you know. So all this subversion that we're talking about is they want to make us all the same. So it's why they've changed the schools from being about the flourishing of an individual's innate abilities, which was actually the original definition of education, to being more about creating social change, you know, creating predictable human beings, where if you can school one generation, you know how they're going to behave when they get older. So they're putting so much into that, but the end goal is to merge us with AI so that they don't have to do any of that, because it's all automated.
Yeah. Right. So they're basically picking and choosing the part of us as human beings, what's beneficial. So in part, they're going to be using our creative faculty to, and what I'm saying is that we create reality based on perception, yada yada. So if they hijack that permanently, they've got that, which is the part that they need. That's the part that they want. But in turn, they're killing us spiritually. So the biggest threat that they have is us, as our spiritual connection, right? And if we all collectively know that we're all one and we are all connected, the whole game's over. So what they're doing, and I think the vaccine's hugely part of this, and this is proper conspiracy stuff, but I genuinely believe it. I think it's going to kill us spiritually. If not, we're already spiritually dead anyway, as you can tell by people ripping each other apart because of the color of their skin. I mean, I just said it all right. So they're just picking apart us as humans and keeping or enhancing the part that is beneficial to the system, whilst destroying the other part that isn't. But I just wanted to say what you've just said about, you know, that cryptocurrency project.
Yeah.
If you was to have said that to someone 10 years ago, they would have called you a conspiracy theorist. 100%, wouldn't they? They would have, wouldn't they?
I think so, yeah. But I think it's just the nature of how fast technology moves, and we don't really appreciate it because we kind of grow up with it, you know, where we're always buying the newest gadget. But when you even watch a film or a documentary, like I was watching a documentary on Steve Jobs last week when he first came out with his like iPhone. I was just thinking, geez, that's only like 15 years, and looking at the tech in the documentary, like it wasn't that long ago, and just how far we've come. So it's just moving at such an exponential rate that, like, I'm sure there's going to be stuff said or coming out in 2 or 3 years time that even we can't fathom now. So
well, once 5G is in place, it's going to enhance so quickly, dramatically quickly. There's a lot of technology that's ready to go, but it's waiting for 5G. And I'll give you one example: Ripple's XRP. That's number one. Once 5G is in place to the level we're talking about, the game's changed forever, I think.
And speaking of XRP, it seems that they might be involved in this WhatsApp project. Have you seen in Brazil, Facebook through WhatsApp have this instant payments solution that I think is actually using MoneyGram on the back end, and it's pretty much a means for people to send instant payments over WhatsApp. So yeah, I can see how 5G will greatly aid that. I think you were telling me before, like it would be a case of you'll walk into a shop and you won't have to go to a till. You'll just walk out and it will be automatically deducted from your accounts, and that's exactly where it's going. It's everything's going to be automated, and so that in itself creates more problems. Like when there's no jobs, what's everyone going to be doing?
It reminds me of a book that I read last year called Blockchain Revolution by Don Tapscott, and one of the key points that he pressed was when you come from like the Industrial Revolution and Industrial Revolution, sorry, and moved into like the age of the internet. He was like, although that seemed like a rapid change, he was like, we still didn't have wireless tech and instant signal and instant transfer of information, whereas we've got that now. So he's saying within one of the chapters of his book that the rate of change, we use the word exponential all the time. He's like, but this time, from this point in history onwards, the rate of change will truly be exponential because we've got such things as AI developing and data transfers becoming quicker and quicker. So the change will just be so quick. It may even be too quick for certain parts of society around the globe, because there's another book that I read by a famous guy out of Silicon Valley by the name of Peter Diamandis, and his book is entitled The Future is Faster Than We Think. If you read that book, your jaw will be on the floor, because you'll be like, this is going on now. Like, these things are in production. These things exist. Like, he makes a point in his book of there's a company, I believe in China, that have already 3D printed a 60-story skyscraper.
Wow.
And it's like, you say that, and it's like, what do you mean they 3D printed it?
I can't even imagine how that works.
Well, it's not hard when we live in a holographic universe. We just figured that out. But this is what Terence McKenna's been banging on about. Well, was banging on about. He was saying it's almost like time, universal time, is almost like the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence in reverse. So we're now getting to a point where time's speeding up, and we're technologically progressing more in 1 year than we did in the previous 10 years, and more in 10 years than we did in the previous 100 years. So, and he was talking about this in like the 70s. Well, I think it was more sort of the 80s and 90s. But anyway, and that's happening, and it's happening dramatically. And like I said, 5G, bang on. That's exactly what that's for. I said probably about 7-8 years ago, we're going to be walking into shops, and you're going to walk in. It's going to know exactly who you are. It will know you're going to the shop before you're in the shop. It's going to know you're on the way to the shop. It knows. It's looked at all the algorithms. It knows exactly what you're doing. And you go in the shop, you pick up what you want. It knows exactly what it is, and then you walk out. By the time that you've walked past where the cashier used to be, that's where the payment is made. Then as soon as you get out the store, it's settled, done. 3 seconds, bang. Calculated. You walk back in, it refunds it, 3 seconds. If that's going to be Ripple technology, which I think it will be, or someone very close to Ripple, probably will be XRP. I think it has to be. It's going to require 5G. It's going to require that instant, quick, complete technology. You can't be doing it off no, Wi-Fi router where you're trying to get the login as you walk in the store. It's going to know, and it's going to be fully integrated.
On Terence as well, like he kind of had this idea of the transcendental object at the end of time, where history and all this evolution, it must be leading up to this kind of nexus point where everything makes sense. And I think what you were saying leads into that theory. And he was kind of at the end of his life, before he got his diagnosis. I think he died of brain cancer. But towards the end of his life, he was both anxious and excited because he felt that in our lifetime, we would see this transcendental object. Like, I'm not sure if I believe this theory myself, but when you look at the rate of change and how fast things are happening, not just technologically, but socially, like culturally, economically, just like everything that's going on, you do kind of wonder, like, is it all leading up to this point? You know, like,
Yeah, and
is there a purpose to evolution? Is there a purpose to like time itself?
yeah, that is interesting and a large topic to discuss. I
Yeah,
mean, my answer is I think so, in a nutshell. You know, one thing I was just thinking as you were talking there, you know, this lockdown. So I think universally everything is both good and bad at the same time. It has to be. It's yin and yang, right? It's always got its positive and negative pole, right? So the lockdown, the negatives, I mean, we could go on about that all day. But positively, for us, which is obviously negative to the system and the plan, I think the world has just had a spiritual awakening to some degree, to some level. Because what a spiritual awakening is you now almost come out of hypnosis and you've now realized that the world isn't exactly what you thought it was within the comfort of what you know, what your viewpoint was, you know. And right now, I think pretty much most people on the planet have realized that it's very fickle and it doesn't add up and there's more questions than answers. So it's almost like that may have been a gamble that they had to take in order to push the next part ahead. And this is probably why the BLM and all of these things, I think, are distractions at the moment, because they almost had to poke the hornet's nest and then distract the hornets in a way because they were going to get stung. Am I making sense there with what I'm trying to say?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a huge backlash here, but I think it's in the nick of time for them. So once 5G goes live, I think we're in, and there's probably no getting away from it because you're part of the system. And once the financial system goes digital, there is no, you know, you'll know who your leader is. You won't know at the core of the core, but you will know that you're controlled. There won't be a conspiracy anymore, in the sense of, is there an elite few that are running them, you know, running the masses? That won't be a conspiracy anymore. That will be a fact. But it'll be too late to do anything anyway, because you talk about it, they'll shut you down. They've got you now. And then obviously the agenda will keep progressing, but that's the main premise, I think.
Yeah, I think over the years they've definitely become more transparent about their agenda. So much so that that they even have the UN website now. What is it? The United Nations New World Order Project. So like we see all these conspiracies that go back decades, and now we're seeing them use all these terms. And you'd be thinking, it's like, why would you use the obvious conspiratorial terms? And I think from their perspective, it gets to a point where, as this agenda advances, they don't mind coming out and like showing people who they actually are. So I think at some point we'll get to that moment, but when we get to that moment, it's going to be too late, and you'll be in a straitjacket pretty much.
Yeah, but they do this all the time, and it frustrates me because I'll have debates with people, and they'll say, so I'll give you a good example. Well, you've just given one example, so we'll use that as one. The other would be something simple like healthy fats in the diet. Yeah, 50 years they were saying you need, like, they were pushing you to have low fat. You know, fat is a problem, it causes heart disease. All these studies, and there is no evidence that eating saturated fat is good for you, and all of these things, right? And all of a sudden they've gone, okay, we was actually wrong. What? You were wrong the whole time. But, I mean, the amount of people that died listening to your shit advice at rubbish, low-fat, crappy, chemical-based foods. Another one would be asbestos is another one. There's no evidence that asbestos causes cancer. Years down the line, oh, we were wrong. So when we're talking about 5G, what makes you think this isn't going to be the same story that we've heard a billion times over? So because you can't find any specific evidence right now, a confession, someone looking you in the eye, confessing it's going to cause these problems down the line, you won't believe it. But history states that they will always deny until the last moment, and then this breathtaking, groundbreaking science proves we was actually wrong the whole time. Oh, whoopsie. Like, is that not going to happen again? I live by that. Is always going to happen.
Cigarettes is a great example of that. It was being pushed as it's actually healthy for years, and then the science of what it was actually doing to people's bodies was being covered up because there was conflicting interests involved, and then all of a sudden it just came out. So yeah.
And now it's like plastered everywhere. Vapes will be the same. Vapes will come out. They'll be worse than cigarettes. I guarantee it.
Do you think?
Sorry, Ben, I butted in on you there, mate. Sorry.
No, it's all right. I was just thinking as you were explaining all of that, like I kept thinking, drawing back to refreshing my memory with some of the research for this discussion, and going back to our mate Yuri Bezmenov. I don't think we really touched too much on him specifically with some of the ideas that we've discussed, but as you were talking then, I was just going through the 4 stages that he states about ideological subversion within society. I think the first one was demoralization. The second one was it was demoralization. Then it was destabilization. Then it was crisis, and then you have what's known as normalization, and correlating with all the points about the Frankfurt School and the other bits that came afterwards that earlier, like you can just see that that's where we're at now. Like,
because I think we're in the crisis phase.
Well, we're about to hit the new normal.
I would say
normalization.
Yeah, I would agree with the crisis. The crisis
so,
part.
Shall we explain each step?
Yeah, let's go for it.
So demoralization, I think he said this usually takes between 15 and 30 years, maybe more. Basically, during the stage, the moral fiber and the integrity of the country is put into question, and doubt is inserted into people's minds about the efficacy of their own culture. So to do this, you have to use the media and academia to influence young people. And as the younger generation embraces these new values, they then bring this forth into the next generation. So if anyone's a student of history, some of the top quotes from top propagandists like Hitler and Joseph Goebbels was always, if you can grab the young, you can predict the next generation. So all these regimes always focused heavily on influencing the younger generation, and it's why if you look at who's funding and influencing academia, media, the schools, you can always see the agenda plainly there. So that's a demoralization. So he said that takes between 15 and 30 years, but he also said America has been in this phase for a very extended period of time. Like when I was researching the education system, like the General Education Board was set up by Rockefeller, I think in 1903, around that time. And this really started to take off. It didn't probably start to take off until the 1940s, 1950s, after the Second World War. So we've been in this phase for like 50, 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the second stage is destabilization, and the purpose of this step is to change the status quo, particularly the country's economy, foreign relations, and the intent here is to create a massive government becoming intrusive in the lives of its citizens. So I think in the United States, with the advent of the technological age, especially after 9/11, when what was that mandate that was revoked after 9/11, which allowed the NSA to spy on its citizens. It's kind of slipping my mind now, but
I think it was the Patriot Act.
the Patriot Act, that was the one I was looking for. Yeah. So we've been kind of seeing the destabilization stage for the past couple of years. So it's allowing a massive government to become intrusive in people's lives. So this can usually take up to 5 years. Again, we've been in this for a pretty extended period of time.
I seem to remember you stated the most important 6 factors that they focused on was religion, education, social lives, power structures, labour relations, which is employer and employee, and obviously law enforcement. That's right, I think.
Yeah. So they basically use entitlements and benefits and bribe people to kind of take these positions. Like for example, when education started to really change in the US, how they actually enabled that was they just opened the doors for the kind of the people that were pushing the changes that they want. So the new methods of education were coming from Leipzig at the time, from a guy called Wilhelm Wundt. So he basically turned psychology into a study of the soul. So psychology was more of a philosophy, and he kind of applied the scientific method to it, and was like, hold on, we can't analyze the soul. It's something that's immaterial. So how can we change psychology so that we can study people's behavior? And this was actually the start of present day education, because teaching kids then became more of a stimulus response mechanism, where if you can create the right experience for a child, you can accurately predict behavior. So he was a psychology professor in Leipzig, and the major professors that then went over to the United States and were funded by Rockefeller to set up universities and psychology boards, they all studied in this new form of psychology, and they brought this over to the United States, and then that became the new method of instruction. So it was basically about opening doors for people that they wanted to change what they were doing. So it doesn't have to be any grandiose conspiracy about bribing anyone. It's just looking out over the horizon and being like, okay, that guy is kind of going where we want to go. Let's open doors for him. Let's fund him, and that's pretty much how it happens.
Yeah, and then was it?
What was that? Was it Aristotle? The quote. Was it something along the lines of, "Give me a child for the first 7 years, and I'll show you the man, or I'll make the man."
Yeah, I think it was Aristotle. Yeah, it's a great quote.
Yeah, so it's clear, because obviously when you're at that stage between, I think it's the 3rd trimester and around 7ish, you're almost like a floppy disk, put in the computer, and it's a blank disk, you can add data, and that creates the man, So this is probably why, like we say, we're targeting the young people. And when you were talking, and I was thinking about this earlier when you said it, when you were talking about the sex education thing, and that's scarred me. That is just horrendous. Do you not think that is part of that aspect? You are basically building the adult.
Absolutely, but we'll consider this. I think the stat goes, unless I stand to be corrected again. I think the first 4 years of life, a human being absorbs more knowledge than it does for the rest of its life.
That's horrendous, isn't it?
I think
that's what we're doing as adults, especially around mid-20s going further. You need to undo the trauma you faced as a child, because no parent's perfect, and we all have our own level of trauma. So when they're saying about this whole white privilege thing and all of this stuff, to a degree, but ultimately we all have our own trauma, and we're all kind of fucked up in our own way, regardless of color. You know, we've all, you know, I could go into mine pretty bloody easily, and that's because I've faced my, you know, I've faced mine, and still a lot to undo, but I'm quite aware of what it is now. It took me years, but that is the quest that we should all go through, is to understand what that trauma is and to face it head on and to overcome it. And unfortunately, a lot of it is subconscious, and you wouldn't be able to consciously remember. It's just there. It's just somewhere there in the psyche. And the journey you go on, or you should go on, is to, before you go on bloody picking on other people and telling other people how to live their lives and all of this rubbish, you need to be figuring that out for yourself. That's your journey, and you need to overcome that.
I think. Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
Sorry, mate. I was just going to make the point. I think in esoteric terms, it can be known as what's called the dark night of the soul. So when you hit adulthood and you have these traumas resurfacing potentially, it's if you're familiar with esoteric teachings, the dark night of the soul, so as the phrase is coined, it's a real thing. It's a process that we all have to go through. But unless you go on that journey of trying to look inwards and know yourself and who you are, what you are, and how powerful you are, these are concepts that can be easily skipped on throughout the whole period of life.
Yeah. I think by the age of 7, you've pretty much formed all of your core beliefs. So the catch-22 here is you get older and you have this kind of trauma surfacing, and because you can't remember before you're 7, sometimes you don't know how to deal with it. You know, you're dealing in the realm of effects when you don't understand the cause. And I went to a hypnosis introductory seminar about 3 or 4 years ago, and this is when I really started to understand this. So over the weekends, I learned that the first 7 years of life, your conscious mind basically hasn't formed properly, and your conscious mind acts as a kind of sieve, and it stops unwanted beliefs from getting into your subconscious. So if I tell you something now, you can choose not to believe it. You know, that's a decision that you make with your rational conscious mind, right? But before the age of 7, you haven't developed that faculty, so that's why you're basically a sponge, and anything that is said or anything you experience will be imprinted on your subconscious mind. So one of his methods, and I found this absolutely fascinating, was how he organized his hypnosis was he pretty much said any problem that people have, it goes back to something that happened to you in your formative years. So he actually performed a hypnosis on a woman there. There was like 20 of us in this group, and she had this irrational fear of spiders, I think it was. Yeah, spiders. She had this irrational fear of like spiders, and she couldn't understand why. So the guy hypnotized her, and he went back through her memory, and he was asking her, okay, can you recall the first time you seen a spider had any interactions with like spiders? And she went back through 3 memories. Okay, so the first one she was describing when she was 5 years old or something, and she was describing being in this garden with her brother, and she was saying that she was describing everything perfectly. She was saying what color her like t-shirt was and everything, and she basically said she was 5 years old and her brother was messing and came up and put a spider on her hair, and she freaked out. Okay, so then he asked her to go back again further, and he went back to when she was 3 or 4 years old, and there was a similar kind of thing. She was in the like bathtub, and there was a spider, and she freaked out. And he, in both instances, he got her to reframe that memory. So he was like, okay, just freeze that image. And he said to her, imagine you as your older self walking into that bathroom, walking out into that back garden. Now, imagine you picking yourself up and telling yourself, oh, it's okay. nothing bad happens here, that like spider's actually your friend, like there's no need to worry at all. And he said the key to this is you have to find the trigger memory. So he said that most of the time hypnosis fails because the hypnotist doesn't find that trigger memory. So he actually went back to when she was 9 or 10 months old, and I'd only believed this because I was there and I witnessed all of this. And he went back to when she was 9 or 10 months old, and she was only a baby in the like cot, and she was able to describe this experience. And there was a spider, and that was the initial triggering memory where her conscious mind couldn't decipher what was going on. So her mind went into the flight or flight response, and she instantly impressed spiders is bad. Anytime something ever happens with a spider, flick that switch where you're in fear mode. Okay, so he got her to reframe that memory too. And while all of this was happening, he got 2 people from the seminar group to go outside and try their best to find a spider in the grass. And they did find a spider, right? And they came back in, and she had like a terrible fear of spiders. She couldn't even see any pictures of them, she was saying. And they brought the spider over to her, and the hypnosis guy asked her, it's like, do you mind having the spider crawl over your hand? And she was kind of like in a daze after the whole thing, and she was kind of, at first she was like, no. And then she looked at the like spider and she started to like smile, and she's like, oh, he's actually really cute, yeah, put him on my hand. And she got them to put the spider on her hand, and the spider started crawling up and down her arm, and she didn't care at all. Like it was almost going under her t-shirt, like a proper spider. And she was smiling at the thing, and she stood up and walked back to her seat. And I was just like holy shit, you know. And since then, any problem I have, you know, I'm thinking, no, it's all related to that time. And if we can understand the problems or proclivities that we have, it's probably something that happened to us at a very young age. But don't despair, because there's always something you can do about it, and hypnosis is kind of one avenue.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think another one is, which is a form of hypnosis in a way, but you could do this yourself through things like affirmation, or it's basically repetition. So
Exactly.
if you lower your brainwave, which is nothing more than hypnosis that's what they do. Because then what you're doing is you're almost taming the conscious mind, and then you're feeding it with whatever, you're feeding the subconscious mind directly. So you may need help for someone to go over the trigger and identify the trigger, but you can repeat. And I think repetition works quite well as well. And when you were talking about the spider, I used to be afraid of spiders. And I know it's because my dad was afraid of spiders. And I've spoke to him about this as well, and he's like, I think I'm afraid because I've seen other people afraid. I've got no reason to be afraid. But as I've consciously kind of recognized that and how stupid it is, I'm no longer afraid of spiders at all. Don't get me wrong, if there was a giant one that come running at me, I'd be like, whoa. But I kind of look at it as like, not cute, certainly not that sort of level, but I look at it like, and I observe them. So I see a big spider and I'll just kind of observe it. And I've had it recently, and my missus gets the right ump. We'd have a spider in the room or something, and I'd just leave it. I'm just like, hey, he's all right. He's just, he's chilling. He's not going to come near us. She's like, what? Get rid of it. So I have to kind of get up and get rid of it. But years ago, I wouldn't have been able to sleep with a spider in the room. If I knew there was a spider in the bedroom, there's no way. Because that would, in my mind, that's going in my eyeball or my mouth. Whereas now I'm like, he'll move on. He's not interested in me. And I kind of observe him as like, that's cool. That's part of nature. Like, there's probably loads of spiders in your room. You just don't know about it, And that was repetition. I'd force myself to look at spiders and kind of observe them. And then the more you observe it, the more you understand it. And the more you understand it, the more you realize there's nothing to be afraid of, So kind of hijacked that one, but I just wanted to kind of throw that
I think
in there.
there's a statistic that every person on average ends up eating 7 spiders per year during their sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I was just looking that up, and although it's just a first Google search, it says that that's a false ideology.
If Snopes says there's no evidence, I'm out.
I've just been debunked.
scientificamerican.com.
It's definitely snubs.
According to scientificamerican.com, the fact that people swallow 8 spiders in their sleep every year is not even close. The myth flies.
18.
So, yeah, according to this,
not even close. It's 8 a week.
To be fair, how do you even measure that? Like, how do you measure that? Are you like watching people sleep like for an entire year?
Well, I think. Do you know another thing that I think? How do you measure that? The population on the planet. How do you measure that? Anyone ever been to India? You can't even measure the amount of people in a city because most of them don't have especially in like some of the towns off grid and things like that. They probably don't have passports. They're probably not on any register.
Well, they have birth certificates, right?
I don't know. Villages in like Africa, Central Africa, in the Congo. Like, how do we know? Who counts it? Does anyone know? I'm just kind of.
It's definitely a ballpark figure, but I think because these stats come from authority figures, they always make it sound like this is de facto, the like absolute truth, even if from their perspective they know it's just a ballpark figure. For them, everything they say has to be exact, and they have to be the like arbiters of truth. So,
well, listen to this. Yeah, I used to book out. Well, I did medical recruitment for years, and I used to book out a doctor. And he sent me his passport. I needed to renew his passport, right, on our system for compliance. And I can't remember the exact facts, but ultimately I said to him, there's no way you're 45. And he's like, I'm not. And I'm looking at his passport and I was like, it says you're 45. He goes, no, I'm 39. I was like, what? And he goes, basically, my passport has my wrong age on it. He's from Nigeria. I was like, what the hell? And he kind of went into the story. It's something around his dad wanted him to start doing something earlier, like, I don't know, education or something like that. But anyway, his passport was years out on his actual age. His actual official passport.
How do you even get around that legislation, wise?
I don't know. This is a fact as well. It was years ago, so I just can't remember the ins and outs to kind of make the story sound legitimate. It probably sounds like I'm making it up, but we were all talking about it. This is a fact. I could probably message the doctor. I've got his number on my phone. I could probably message him and ask him, and he would tell me. But ultimately, his passport wasn't right. That's mad. And when you go to places like, say, for instance, Indonesia, India, there's no way we know how many people are there. No way.
It's an interesting topic, actually, because, I mean, I've not looked into this in any depth other than I've seen it online somewhere before, but I was looking into an idea or a narrative that the whole idea of depopulation, which obviously ties into eugenics, and, we often point the finger at Bill Gates and the powers that be. They're trying to kill us. I was reading an idea that the theory of depopulizing the human race is a bit of a myth in itself, and I think it pointed to, if you look at ever since we've been supposedly been recording numbers of human population on Earth, we've never, and this is accounting for world wars, pestilences, famine, disease, genocide, everything that's supposedly being recorded. The theory is that if you look at the numbers, we've never actually decreased in numbers. Therefore, how could we possibly subscribe to the idea of deliberate depopulation? Like, it doesn't make any sense when, supposedly, if you look at the numbers, we've always increased as a human race as the decades and centuries have moved forward. So, I mean, I don't know if that's a true hypothesis and theory or not, but it makes for an interesting perspective when, right now we do see a lot of eugenics and depopulation ideas being bandied around.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I'm
the
trying to
George
do some
Floyd sounds what
Googling. Oh, I was just saying, I'm doing some Googling now, trying to figure out how we actually fully calculate the population. And I'm looking at the numbers changing, as in the population is going up and down. Like,
Right.
it's
Okay.
just crazy. But they're calculating death rates. Like, I can tell you now, I'll count now right now. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 people just died.
Live counter, nice. Imagine
That
sitting
is
there
crazy.
all day watching that. How like sadistic would you be just to be staring at that, being like, oh, 50 people in the like last 10 seconds died.
That's horrendous. So births
Sit
today,
there all day watching it.
this very day, apparently on the whole planet, for 374,160. Well, sorry, now 178 people were born today on the planet right now. I guarantee that's a couple of hundred out. Surely.
Well, we just don't know how they calculate these things. I once heard a statistic that every night, on average, 1 million people die,
Oh Jesus, that's sad.
which is
Isn't it?
crazy. But how many births are there in that case, if to counter it? Because if we're supposed to be growing as a population, surely that means there's more births each day, which I would assume. Surely we don't have on average 1 million births every day.
I don't think overpopulation is going to be a problem, because if you look at the birth rates of most of these countries, most of them are at below replacement levels. So we should actually be looking at a means for how we can keep
No,
the steady, because I think China had a one baby policy, but then a too large a percentage of their population were elderly, so they've now changed it to a 2-kid policy. But like even that in itself will just maintain the population. So.
yeah, definitely. I believe I read something similar about Japan as well, and how demographically their age structure's been altered and won't sort of return to a previous, what was deemed as a balance, because they also and it's very prevalent in today's society, that the newer generations are just not that way inclined to be thinking about families and children. So it's had a long-term knock-on effect on the demographics. And yeah, I think societal changes in the perception towards the family unit, as you say, within the subversion, breaking one of the points I think was breaking down the family unit. And that's not always exclusive to the Western world. It works all over the world, really.
Oh, guys, sorry, here we go. Obviously, the UN data is based on estimates and can't be 100% accurate. So in all honesty, nobody can possibly say with any degree of certainty on which day world population reached 7 billion or any other exact number. So basically, this is a guesstimate.
I wonder how close it is, though. Did you say
miles
so?
Off.
The day you said that they were estimating that there was 300,000 births. So if Ben is correct that on average there's 1 million deaths per day, it means that the population should be going down.
Yeah. My stats probably way out then. Like I say, I can't.
I presume they all are, yeah.
Yeah.
What if there isn't 7 billion and it's actually 20 billion? Imagine it was that far off.
Well, they're saying here that there's been 109 billion people on the planet ever. How would you know that? That just sounds like they've just made that up. Secondly, they reckon so reaching 7 billion. So they're saying, I've lost it now, a specific date where we reach 7 billion. Okay, I think it was at 4:21 a.m. on October the 31st at 2011, we hit 7 billion.
Yet they say it's not accurate.
They ain't got a bloody clue, have they? They're just fucking throwing out numbers. They've probably got a rough idea, but they could have been well off from the beginning. Like I said, we have no idea, would you? Well, you've been in the Amazon. We don't even know how many people are in the Amazon. Like, how many people are born in the Amazon today without birth certificates? What a load of bollocks! I'm not buying any of it.
Yeah. I think in terms of overpopulation, I think getting people to believe that the world is overpopulated is a very important myth that they push, because even now, like I can't tell you the amount of people that I talk to even now who, when this pandemic started, they like say responses to, oh, we like needed a good culling, People, like, if everyone believes that there's too many people, it means it's easy to rationalize, oh, a few million die here, a few million die here. It's meant to happen. It's actually nature playing its course. This virus
Yeah,
coming
it's well and
along,
good to say
it's
that until you say
actually nature. Yeah,
it's good that people say that, but what distinguishes you being one of the ones that made it? So it's
yeah.
all well and good saying, yeah, we need to kill off some people. Well, why don't you go first then? Oh, no, not me. Okay,
I
well,
think, yeah, I think if there are overpopulation problems, it's not down to the actual problem of overpopulation. It's down to mismanagement of resources and just how our system is built, like the way disproportionate number of people live in poverty compared to those in like affluence. So I think it's mismanagement rather than the actual numbers being too high.
yeah, I mean, you've got in one breath they're saying that obviously we're overpopulated, but then in the next breath they're talking about how much food we waste on an annual basis. It's clear. It's like you said, it's a mismanagement of resources. But how many times have you heard as a narrative? And I think the climate change situation was key here. How many times have you heard that human beings are the virus, or human beings are a virus?
I've heard
And then
that.
all of a sudden we have a global pandemic. It's just again like repetitively putting that into the subconscious. Virus. Even Anthony Joshua in his speech, racism's a virus. You're the vaccine. Be the vaccine. Vaccine. They repeat these phrases.
Affirmation.
So apparently, and it's always upside down. It's always the opposite. So they're saying that we are a virus. We're not a virus. We actually create. We creators. We create this reality. Get rid of us, and it's all done, right? So by imagine convincing us that we are a virus, and I even know people that are spiritually, I hate using the word woke now because it's just that has been hijacked as well, but that are part of that, woke spiritual, community, and they'll say like, don't worry about racism. I hate all people. What? We're almost like mind controlled now. We're under mind control to hate human beings, and like you say, to believe that we're overpopulated and we are the virus of the earth. And that's the narrative that we're seeing with this whole coronavirus thing. We're all in lockdown, and apparently all of a sudden, all the oceans are blue again. What, within 5 minutes? Okay. It's all bullshit.
Interesting on the population one. There was a statistic floating around in my head, and I thought I'd better check this one for clarity. There was a research by a study done by the University of Sheffield back in 2012, and that showed that less than 6% of the United Kingdom is actually urban. A range of between 88 and 99.9% of the United Kingdom landmass isn't actually quote unquote built upon. So it's like, when you think of that, it's like, how could we possibly even conceive the idea that we're overpopulated when can't we just spread out?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think one common example given, I think it's a state in the United States, but it's pretty much that you could fit the entire world population into one state and
Texas, I believe.
And still have the rest, so.
It's just mad. Lads, should we leave it here? Reason being, we have gone in and it's been an amazing chat, but I'm a bit worried that, we're on 2.5 hours now. Like I said earlier, we could go on and on and on. And I think what we should probably do to add additional value is, Tom, to get you back on again. I think there's probably 10 topics that we can discuss straight off the bat, just thinking about it. And it'll probably do us justice to break it down into categories, as opposed to, like I said, we could just keep going and going. Obviously, there was somewhat an agenda to this podcast. We have gone off topic, but it's all relevant. We know it is anyway. But I think there's some of these topics I think we should probably save and really home in on and focus on for future episodes. It's been really smooth, really, really good interview. It's been great to have you on.
Thanks very much, man. It's been great to be out with us.
Yeah, we've been talking about it for a while, so yeah, it is a pleasure. So really, really pleased that we could get you on, and yeah, I think it's been an amazing chat.
Yeah, we look forward to the next one. I think it would be a good move for us to make these a more regular occurrence moving forward. So yeah, thanks ever so much, Tom. It's been a real pleasure of ours to have you on as one of the first guests.
No problem, lads. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed our chat. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Awesome. Right. Well, we'll catch you on the next one, and have a good week.
Same to you guys. Good luck.
Peace.